welcome to our next episode of the Hormone Café. Today I want to talk about sleep and its relationship to fertility and hormones and why our sleep is so important and practical things that we can do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that we're getting enough sleep. Because our whole goal, of course, is to keep our hormones regulated and to feel amazing every single day and have lots of energy. So let's talk about first, why is sleep so important? So it's important for a lot of different reasons. One is that sleep regulates something called our HPO axis. And our HPO stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, ovarian. Our body has this really specific order which it talks to itself. So for example, our hypothalamus, which is in our brain, will talk to our pituitary, which will talk to our ovaries. Our ovarian hormones feed back to the brain and the cycle continues. So sleep literally regulates that process. So our hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis is highly sensitive to circadian rhythm and sleep quality. For example, there's something that our brains produce called GnRH. That's what pings our ovaries to help recruit follicles which have eggs inside. So if we're not getting proper GnRH pulsatility, then that can decrease our ovulation. It also dampens our LH signaling if we're sleep deprived. So that means that our LH is going to be lower and we're not going to have a high enough LH to trigger a good high quality ovulation. So not getting enough sleep literally dampens our hormones, and that it's in and of itself can lead to fatigue. Having low hormones does not feel good, and then it also prevents us from ovulating well. It can lead to a lot of PMS symptoms, a lot of irritability, a lot of mood issues, and then if our hormones aren't set up for success, then we're not preparing our uterus lining properly for implantation. So it can cause things like irregular cycles, poor ovulation, anovulation or not ovulating in a cycle, and then poor luteal function after we ovulate, where our uterus is not set up for success for implantation. Another thing that is really important when we think about sleep is our cortisol levels, because in a perfect hormone balance, when we wake up, our cortisol is really high. So it starts off really high and then decreases throughout the day. So you want your cortisol to be high in the morning and low in the evening. When we're sleep deprived, it really leads to dysregulated cortisol, and it can cause us to make cortisol at the wrong times, or to feel like we need to improve our own cortisol levels by having caffeine or something like that. So if we get a good night's sleep, we'll wake up well rested. Our body will make a lot of cortisol in the morning and then decrease the cortisol levels throughout the day and low cortisol at night. If our cortisol is just constantly low, then we're always going to feel extremely down. Or if our cortisol is high when it's not supposed to, that can make us feel wide awake and amped when we're not supposed to be feeling wide awake and amped. So getting enough sleep can really help regulate our cortisol levels, which has to do with our energy and our stress. And then another thing that's extremely important is our insulin resistance. So if you're doing a continuous glucose monitor, you'll find that on nights where you don't get a great night's sleep, that day, the following day, it's actually really hard to manage your blood sugar and keep it stable. You'll find that even if you eat really well, your blood sugar can go all over the place and it doesn't have a high tolerance if we're eating a lot of carbohydrates or treats. However, if we're getting a good night's sleep, our body is much more able to stabilize its glucose. So our glucose levels will be much flatter, our glucose won't spike as high, and we'll have much more ability to be able to tolerate having a carbohydrate or a treat, and it won't spike us as high, because sleep deprivation literally reduces our insulin sensitivity and increases our fasting glucose and our insulin. So this is especially important in women who have PCOS because they already have insulin sensitivity. So it's really important if you have PCOS to get a good night's sleep. And of course, that can help with ovulation and egg quality. So even a few nights of poor sleep can really throw off your glucose long term. When we think about sleep, we also want to think about our circadian rhythm. So it doesn't just matter how long somebody sleeps, it's when they sleep and how consistently they sleep. So for examples, late night light exposure, irregular sleep schedules, shift work where you're working nights, all those things can really throw off your circadian rhythm. So when we think about our circadian rhythm, what we want to do is train our body to calm down at night before we go to bed, increase our melatonin at that time so that we fall asleep, stay asleep the entire night, wake up, and then are exposed to sunlight and make a lot of cortisol. And circadian rhythm is literally how your body responds to things light and dark. So that's why in a perfect world we'd be asleep when it's dark outside and awake when it's light outside, because light is training our body to make more cortisol. So our circadian rhythm with regards to the light and dark can really pair with when we're sleeping to give us a much more high quality sleep. And then when we think about going to sleep, we think about increasing our melatonin production. And that's why it's so important to have a sleep routine where we calm down in those 2 hours before we want to go to bed, because melatonin is literally present in follicular fluid, in the follicle fluid that holds the egg, and it's a very powerful antioxidant. It protects our eggs, which are called oocytes, from oxidative stress. So the higher the melatonin, the better the egg quality. And there are studies that show that even taking melatonin can produce better egg quality. But what would be more beneficial is that we have natural melatonin. So we want to have enough melatonin at night that we're really preventing oxidative stress, and our body, while we're sleeping, is allowed to nourish and heal. So any DNA damage, any oxidative damage that happened during our day has to get fixed at night. So literally, the better and longer and deeper we sleep, the better our eggs are going to be, because if there was any damage to our body during the day, our body is able to repair that at night. So that's extremely important. And then they've done studies, and they've really literally shown that sleep deprivation decreases our LH pulsatility, can decrease our hormone production, which causes oxidative stress and low egg quality, and then leads to insulin dysfunction, and then also metabolic dysfunction. Sometimes people tell me that they're exercising really well and they're eating really well and they're still not able to lose weight, or they have 5 or 10 pounds that they just cannot get off. And we really have to focus on their sleep, because during sleep, your body is able to rest and recover. If you're not getting enough sleep, your body's going to chronically be in stress mode. If your body's chronically in stress mode, it's going to hold on to weight. So if you're a person that you feel like your metabolism has just been stuck in the same place for a really long time, you really want to focus on your sleep, because they did a retrospective controlled trial back in 2025, and they showed that lower sleep can literally lead to metabolic dysfunction. Another thing that they found is that low sleep can cause systemic inflammation. Literally, it can cause inflammation in your entire body. So there are markers that we use to measure inflammation, like IL-6, TNF, and CRP, and those markers were literally higher in people who were sleep deprived than in people who got at least 7 hours of sleep every single night. So sleep, of course, is the cornerstone of health, and those are just some really specific examples of why it's important and how important it is. So sometimes it seems really obvious and really basic. Okay, get enough sleep, but it's truly important for your health and your fertility and your hormone balance. You really want to prioritize your sleep. So let's go over what matters clinically, what we should be doing, and then some high yield practical things that we should be doing as part of our day and night to get the best sleep. So the optimal sleep duration has been shown to be at least 7.5 hours per night. So you really want to be getting at least 7.5 hours per night of sleep. In a perfect world, we would be getting 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep every night. Less is not good, and also more is not better. We don't want to oversleep and we don't want to undersleep. So the reason that we don't want to oversleep is, again, it's about that circadian rhythm training our body. So let's say that we sleep in until 11 or 12, then we wake up, and then we're training our body not to make cortisol until noon. And then if we were to wake up at a regular time in the morning, more like 6, 7, 8 o'clock, our body wouldn't even know to make cortisol until noon. So we would wake up feeling extremely tired and sluggish. So that's why we want to have consistent sleep and wake times. One thing that's really important is we have to balance sleep debt with consistent sleep and wake time. For example, you want to run experiments on yourself or get a sense of how much sleep your body needs. So for example, my body needs 8 hours of sleep every single night. And if I get a couple nights of 6 hours, then I need to be getting a couple nights of 9 hours. But I don't want to do that so chronically. For example, you don't want to stay up really late for many nights in a row, not get very much sleep, and then make up for it on the weekends where you're sleeping for really long periods of time. Consistent sleep and wake time is extremely important for our hormones and our fertility. So it's very important that we do the same thing during the week as on the weekend, and that we really try not to get into such a sleep debt that we need to make up for it on the weekend, and that we don't spend a lot of time either sleeping in on the weekend or sleeping in on days and not waking up when we would normally wake up. Because in a perfect world, we would go to bed by 10 and wake up at 6 and do that every single day, every single night, 7 days a week, no matter what day it is. So you really want to have a consistent sleep and wake time. Another thing that really matters is getting to bed around 10 o'clock or around when it starts getting dark out. Because if you go to bed late, it actually is not as high quality of sleep as if you go to bed around 10. So for example, let's say you were to get 8 hours of sleep between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. That would be much more rejuvenative and really reduce oxidative stress more than if you went to bed at midnight and woke up at 8 a.m. So even though you're still getting 8 hours, it's going to be lower quality sleep than if you went to bed at 10. And so studies have showed that later bedtimes lead to less likelihood of pregnancy, just because we're not able to rejuvenate as much during the night if we're going to bed so late. Another thing is that when we're going to bed so late, we're awake when it's dark out, and we're training our body to make cortisol at that time. So we're literally training our body to be wide awake and make cortisol in the nighttime, when really we want to train our body to be wide awake and make cortisol in the daytime. So that's why matching up your sleep with the night and day, the dark and light, can really help optimize your circadian rhythm, because that is where you're going to get the highest quality sleep. Okay. So when we think about high quality sleep, we want to make sure we fall asleep easily, stay asleep the whole night, and then feel rested when we wake up. So if you're a person who has either PCOS or irregular cycles or luteal phase defects or fertility or recurrent pregnancy loss or symptoms of high cortisol, these are circumstances where you really want to think about your sleep and make sure you're optimizing your sleep. So let's talk about some practical interventions, like what actually moves the needle. Number one, you really need to have a consistent schedule, which is what we talked about, right? We want to have the same bedtime and wake time every single day, day in and day out. If we are going on a trip or we're traveling and our sleep is going to be disrupted, we want to make sure that we keep all of the other pillars of hormone balance consistent, okay? So if there's times where we aren't sleeping as well, or where maybe we're traveling, or we're in a new bed, or we're in a new place, or we have less control over our sleep, those are going to be days where we need to exercise regularly, eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, make sure we're getting enough protein, make sure we're managing our stress, so that throwing off our sleep doesn't throw off all the rest of our metabolism, cortisol, insulin, and hormones. So the more we can have a consistent schedule, the better. And on nights where we don't have a consistent schedule, we need to keep everything else as stable as possible. Number two is light exposure. So we really want to have a cool down about 1 to 2 hours before we go to bed. So starting at least, if you're going to bed at 10, starting at least by 9 o'clock or 1 hour before you go to bed, you don't want to have any blue light, or we don't want to have a lot of light at all, but especially blue light, because that really stimulates our cortisol production. We don't want to be doing phone scrolling. We don't want to be on our computer. We don't want to be doing TV. We don't want to have any screens an hour before bed. If you're a person who just has to log on to your laptop or your computer or be on your phone before you go to bed, if all else fails, you just really want to wear blue light glasses so that that light is not stimulating you and keeping you awake. So reducing your light exposure, especially your blue light, an hour before you go to bed is extremely important. The other thing that you want to do is get morning sunlight within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up. So if you're inside, you at least want to open a window and be in a room that has sunshine. In a perfect world, we would actually go outside and get sun. So if that's part of your routine, I usually recommend eating breakfast. And if eating breakfast or drinking coffee or drinking tea, something like that in the morning, try to do that outside where you're exposed to the sun, because that will train your body. Okay, time to make a lot of cortisol. So we really fill up our energy tank. So we have a lot of energy to sustain us throughout the entire day. Number 3 is nutrition timing. We really want to avoid late night eating. In a perfect world, we wouldn't eat 2 hours before we go to bed. So if we're going to bed at 10, that means we need to stop eating by 8 o'clock. So those of us, anyone who eats dinner later, you really just want to, if you can move up your dinner earlier in the night, that's very helpful. And then really make sure that you stop eating 2 hours before you go to bed. Sometimes there are people who need to eat a high protein snack before they go to bed. You just want to have that snack about 30 minutes before bedtime if you need that in order to sustain your blood sugar throughout the night. And then having stable blood sugar throughout the day also improves our sleep, and then having good sleep improves our blood sugar. So those things really compound on each other. For example, if you eat really late at night, or you eat something with a lot of carbohydrates, or you eat right before you go to bed, it can keep your blood sugar high all night long. Higher blood sugars are associated with lower sleep scores, so that will keep you feeling less rested when you wake up. You really want your blood sugar to be really flat, because if you think about what your body's doing while you're sleeping, you need your metabolic functions and your digestion to remain calm so that your body can heal and rejuvenate the cells. But if you ate right before you went to bed, then your body has to put all this energy into focusing on digestion and breaking down what you just put into your body and putting it into your bloodstream. And that requires a lot of work and a lot of energy. So we don't want to be eating, giving our body a lot of work to do when it's supposed to be calming down and doing the work to rejuvenate and nourish us on a cellular level instead. So that's why eating before bed, you just have to be really careful, right? You want to make sure that you're saving your body's metabolic needs at night for what it's supposed to be doing, and then keeping your blood sugar stable. You also want to make sure that you eat enough protein throughout the day so your blood sugar isn't plummeting at night. Sometimes people will wear continuous glucose monitors and their blood sugar will be in the 50s at night. Usually that means that we didn't eat enough protein the day before. And if your blood sugar is really low, it can actually wake you up in the middle of the night and you can be really hungry. So nutrition timing and getting enough protein throughout the day and keeping our blood sugar curves really flat can really help with our sleep, and it's very important. Number 4 is that we want to reduce stimulants. So we don't want to be doing any caffeine after noon. So those of us who do any tea or coffee, always make sure all tea or coffee is before noon. If you're a person who feels like you have a crash when in the afternoon, a couple of things that you want to do. You want to audit your morning. Make sure that you got 20 grams of protein for breakfast, because if you don't eat enough for breakfast, it's much easier to have a cortisol and an energy crash mid-afternoon. And then you want to make sure, of course, you're eating lunch within 3 to 4 hours of eating breakfast so that your food can continue to nourish you throughout the day. You don't want to be getting hangry or hypoglycemic or have a cortisol plummet in the middle of the afternoon. Sometimes we just feel exhausted and we feel like that's when we eat our coffee, right around 2 or 4 p.m. Instead of having coffee, try a couple different things. Have a high protein snack and a huge glass of electrolytes instead. Sometimes that can be all you need to prevent your cortisol from crashing and build it up a little bit. Sometimes it's also, in addition to just having a high protein snack, it's helpful to even have like a little mini dinner with some carbohydrates and some healthy fats and some vegetables. Have a little mini dinner and have a huge glass of electrolytes. Go outside and take a walk. Those are going to be much better than having caffeine after noon. So really try to limit your caffeine after noon. Number 5 is your bedroom environment. You really want to keep your bedroom dark, cool, and quiet. And when we think about darkness, look around and make sure you don't have any little tiny electronic lights that are staying on all night long, because any form of light at night will cause your cortisol levels to go up during the night, and you want to keep them as low as possible. So make sure that any electronics, little dots of light, try to make sure that they're covered and you keep your room as dark as possible. And then blackout curtains are really helpful too. Another thing is that usually people do better if it's nice and cool in their bedroom with regards to sleep, and then you want it to be quiet. So make sure that your environment is really quiet. Sometimes it's helpful to use a white noise machine or have some kind of white noise, but you have to make sure that it's consistent. You don't want your brain to be triggered by changes in sounds at night. So bedroom environment is very important. And then number 6 is your cool down routine. So you literally have to train your body to calm down and make a bunch of melatonin. So that's going to start 1 to 2 hours before we go to bed. You literally want to have a cool down routine. That's where we stop looking at our screens, we stop working, we don't do blue light, we do something very calming like journaling, meditating, reading, taking a bath with Epsom salts and lavender and essential oils. It's very important that we're literally teaching our body to make a bunch of melatonin and to decrease our cortisol production. Right before you go to bed is not the time to really amp up your brain, amp up your mind, be really busy, clean your house, eat some food. That's the time where we want to really legitimately calm down our bodies and be relaxing. And then we want to make sure that wherever our bedroom environment is, that's our relaxing place. So sometimes it can be helpful if we're doing work, not to work in our bedroom, so that we're training ourselves like when we're doing work, we're going to be on, but when we're in our bedroom, we're taking a bath, we're taking a hot shower, that's the time to be cool, calm, and lower our cortisol levels. And then the last thing is supplements. If you're a person who is having a hard time with sleep, my favorite thing to start with is magnesium glycinate. You're going to be wanting to do about 400 to 600 milligrams of magnesium glycinate. And then you can either do that as a powder or as a pill. Magnesium is very natural and it's very calming. It can really help you calm down before you go to bed. And then glycine is another really helpful supplement. If it's helpful to if you need something to just really help you calm down. Glycine and magnesium, they both come as a powder. So a lot of people will make a little drink and it'll be part of their nighttime routine to drink this calming drink. For those of us who really like tea, chamomile tea is really, really nice and can be really soothing. If we think about our chamomile and our sleepy time teas, that can literally help your body start to go to sleep. So drinking something hot, like a hot tea with chamomile, something that's obviously not caffeinated, not stimulating, doing a little bit of magnesium and then glycine. Sometimes it can happen where we're just super exhausted or we've been working really hard or staying up late or traveling or we have a period of insomnia where we just haven't been sleeping well and we just really, really need to go to sleep. That's when we think about our stronger supplements or our sleep medications. So my go-to supplements for that are, it's definitely okay to take melatonin or Unisom at night before you go to bed. Usually though, you don't want to incorporate those into your routine every single night, right? We don't want to rely on melatonin. We don't want to rely on Unisom. We don't want to rely on prescription sleep medications to fall asleep every single night. We want to save those things as tools for periods in our lives where we're just really burnt out and we just need 3 to 7 nights of good sleep in a day. So keep your routines really stable, even when you're traveling or you're not at home, so that you can continue that process of retraining your circadian rhythm, training your body to make hormones and melatonin and cortisol in proper amounts. And then if we throw that off, right, we have a deadline that we need to hit. We've been staying up really late. We need a couple good more nights of rejuvenative sleep. That's when we can use our melatonin and our Unisom to help us for a couple nights in a row. And then we want to come off of that and then reestablish our healthy sleep patterns. So in summary, we really focus on our sleep because it affects literally every single cell in our body. Specifically for our hormones and our fertility, it affects our hormone production, like our HPO axis regulation, the way that our brain talks to our ovaries. It affects our oxidative stress and our egg quality, our cortisol and our stress signaling, our insulin sensitivity, and our metabolism. So sleep truly is the cornerstone of health, right? If we're chronically sleep deprived, we'll find that it's impossible to really fix the things that we want to fix and to truly feel excellent and energetic every single day. Because one thing that we don't want to do is just chronically run ourselves into the ground, not get a lot of sleep, and then have to rely on things like caffeine and supplements to be able to go to sleep, right? We don't want to fix one problem and then cause another problem. We truly want to have good habits every single day. Sleep is one of the main ways your body regulates hormones and ovulation. So if your sleep is off, everything becomes harder to correct. And we want to make sure that we're not relying on other medications or stimulants or depressants in order to fall asleep, right? We want to make sure that we train our bodies properly so that we can have amazing energy day in and day out. So my homework for you this week is to pick one sleep habit and really stick to it for 7 days in a row. So do it for a week and then do it for a month. So if you're a person who's like me and who's a night owl and tends to stay up a little bit later than they should, really pick a bedtime and stick to that, right? If you tend to go to bed much later, 11 or 12, then you want to move up your bedtime by an hour. It doesn't have to be 2 or 3 hours, right? You're not going to be able to change your circadian rhythm over time, but just pick one small sleep habit. I want you to stick to it for a week, and then I want you to message me and tell me what you did and how it affected you. If you need some help measuring your hormones, figuring out your insulin resistance, figuring out your cortisol levels, and importantly, trying to figure out how much sleep you need, and you need some help with that, do not hesitate to contact us. Our specialty is specializing your sleep, stress, hormone, and food, ideally for your body, because my goal for you is that you feel amazing every single day. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Hormone Cafe, and stay tuned for our next episode.